All right. I'm so excited to have a kinesiologist on the Arthritis Life podcast for the first time. So I'm so happy to welcome Jasmin Ma. Hi. Would you
Hi,
like,
Cheryl. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you. And if you don't mind just sharing, a little bit about yourself, where you live, and what is your relationship to arthritis?
Yeah, so I always think that's a funny question to ask to share about yourself. 'Cause you can identify so many different things, but I'd say
Yeah.
first and foremost is I'm a physical activity enthusiast. I live in Vancouver in BC, so very fortunate to live on these beautiful lands. And yeah, a little bit about myself. Um, I am a kinesiologist by trade, but my primary job is I'm a faculty member in the School of Kinesiology, and I mostly teach in the areas of exercise and disability. Um, Essentially, how do we help people to start and stick to physical activity? In terms of my relationship to arthritis, I'd say it kind of centers around both community and research. So some very important people in my life have arthritis. My dad has gout and my mom has knee osteoarthritis. And over the years, I've developed really close and really important relationships to me through Arthritis Research Canada's Arthritis Patient Advisory Board. These are folks that live with arthritis and people that I continue to learn from. So that's kind of a bit of how I sort of see my relationship with arthritis, like from the community, have stemmed a lot of questions that I try to address through my research and teaching.
That's so phenomenal. And the reason I heard about you in the first place was actually through Eileen Davidson, who's a
Yes.
very active, patient advocate, and she's been on the podcast more than once. So the
Yeah.
people who've been listening for a while might know her. And I will for sure link to like one of Eileen's past episodes where she's talked about, physical activity and the importance of that.
Yes.
And I'll also link in the show notes to Arthritis Research Canada and the advisory board because that's such a great resource for patients to know about. Oftentimes, I'm in the United States, and oftentimes we
Hmm.
default to thinking about our own like arthritis foundation and forget there's amazing resources in Canada and across the world as well.
That's
But
right.
before we go more into your story, I want to actually take a second to define what is a kinesiologist and what is kinesiology for people listening.
That is a great question. I'm so glad you asked, Cheryl. And I'd say that this definition, like most health professions, our scope is constantly evolving, but ours in particular, because we are a newer profession, does continue to evolve. So if you were to ask me, the kinesiology is the study of human movement, and a kinesiologist. I sort of help to distinguish between, say, for example, your physical therapist and a personal trainer. So, one of the key differences between a physical therapist and a kinesiologist is the movement that we work with is on the broader spectrum of physical activity, and we take a bit more of a focus on, for example, fitness and more of, say, for example, some of those long-term goals in movement, whereas your physical therapist, you might be working on more of a rehabilitation specific goal. That's not to say that kins can't work together with physiotherapists or on a rehabilitation goal, but I do like to make a little bit of that distinction in that we are focused on, sort of that fitness performance and sort of your integration into everyday movement as well. So everyone practices their kinesiologist practice a little bit differently. But for me, it's about getting people to start and stick to physical activity and find ways that we love physical activity.
Absolutely. Yes. And I honestly didn't know what kinesiology was until I had already started my master's in occupational therapy. And all the students, when they're
Yeah,
introducing themselves, said, I majored in kinesiology. And I went to a very liberal arts undergraduate program. So I was like, there was nothing like practical in my program, in my school. You know what I mean? It was
right.
all like, you know, anyway, I went to an amazing college, but it just wasn't about preparing you for like a specific career. So
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, what is kinesiology? Is it a science of movement or the study of movement? And it's so fascinating. Yeah, because like you said, you can apply it in so many different ways. And when you have arthritis, it's a deterrent fundamentally to movement initially, because I
Yeah.
think most people at a base, at your gut level, think if I'm in pain, I shouldn't move. But as we know from
Mhm.
science, which I will let you talk about, that's not actually the way to go. So, what I'm actually in your story, I'm interested, what made you want to become a kinesiologist and then specialize in arthritis?
Yeah. Oh, geez. Yeah. Dating me back a bit. I'd say, I mean, like I said, like kinesiology, we're really interested in movement and, we come about it from a really interdisciplinary perspective. So I love that you picked up that, there are different aspects of kinesiology. And what I think is really cool, especially here at UBC, the university that I'm at, we look at human movement right from cell to society, we'll say. So we look at the psychosocial aspects of it, as well as the physiological, biomechanical, neuromechanical, et cetera. So lots of different ways that you can look at. So one, I think it was the diversity. Like I could never choose. I loved school.
That was me too. Like that's why
Right.
occupational therapy was like choosing without choosing, because it's like
Right.
major in everything, like everyday activities and helping people function
Yes,
in life. I'm like, that's yeah, it's broad yet specific.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the variety, like the interdisciplinary approach to human movement. But, looking way back, I was really fortunate, like I grew up playing sports as a kid. It's the classic bit there. I had really active parents. And then when I was going through my schooling, when I first started kinesiology, what had me continue all of my training in kinesiology was I worked as a kinesiologist and a personal trainer for an exercise clinic that was specialized for people with disabilities, and many of which of our clients also had arthritis. And yeah, it was just like I just got involved in this community. Like I'll keep coming back to this, just how important that is, like the people that you meet and the relationships that you hold. That was a really big part of why I started Kin was, yep, I loved movement and exercise. But it's the people that have you keep coming back, is really sort of, yeah, why that kind of got me to start my career as a kinesiologist and later to study it.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'm very extroverted, so community is a huge draw for me. And I just love the branding of this. You have a lab that you work in or work
Hmm.
for. I don't know what the right word is there, but movement for all, like movement and then like a
Yeah.
for all. And what does movement for all mean, and how did this lab start? Just tell me more about it.
Yeah. So yeah, the Movement for All lab is I guess my lab that um, I always had this dream of, so when I started my kin degree back in the day, I had this dream of, like, wouldn't it be really cool if I could run an exercise center where it kind of worked as a living lab, and, it was, inclusive, and it felt like a place that was fun, and just, everyone felt welcome, but we could also, study what's working and what's not working and advance how we do physical activity. So that was kind of like the impetus for it. So when I was hired as faculty at UBC in the School of Kin, I had this opportunity to create my lab. And so a lot of the research that I do and the work that I do is with community partners, that, offer programming, whether that's for people with disabilities or the general population, and are interested in finding ways to make their spaces and their programming more inclusive. So yeah, that's like where the Movement for All lab kind of came from, was, like I always had that sort of tagline of like, we put the all in physically active, and it makes more sense when you see it written. But in any case, and then Movement for All,
Physically.
like
Oh, I
the,
like that.
yes,
Physically
physically.
active. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the M4A lab, the initials MA, is conveniently spelled my last name. So
Oh, no, we are so like birds of a feather, because I'm so obsessed with acronyms and like play on
yeah,
words, and like even like Room to Thrive is like an acronym for my program. That's like I
right.
love it. I love it. This is so
Yeah.
great. I mean,
Well,
oh, sorry. Continue.
sorry. Yeah, yeah. No, I was just gonna say, like, I kind of segue from that. We'll come back to that, but you know, uh, I think just an opportunity to give a bit of a shout out to some of my mentors and colleagues that got me
Yes.
into arthritis, because my former postdoc supervisor, Dr. Linda Lee, who's a scientist and at, yes, you know, Linda.
I know her. Yeah.
She also loves acronyms. And then, I also just have to give a shout out to Alison Coons as well, who's a knowledge broker. She wears many hats.
Yes.
And if you haven't had her on your podcast, I highly recommend that you do. But both of them have just, been really integral in getting me involved in the arthritis community and the research world. And yeah, we're also all cut from the same cloth where we love our acronyms.
Yeah, it really seems to be something that ties us all together
Mm-hmm.
in the arthritis world. But I love the way that you talked about wanting to develop a space that is the word that stood out to me there is fun, actually, in
Mm-hmm.
addition to all the other things, because I think oftentimes when things are developed for people with disabilities, people are almost seem to be afraid of fun because they're like, well, we don't want to make light of the fact that you have a disability, but like everyone wants to have fun, right? And have joy
Mm-hmm.
and not have things be, I think most people don't appreciate things being super dry or, so what are some of the ways that you've like embedded fun into the experience?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I think part of it is, I work a lot with students. So, a big part of my role is in teaching. And, I remember it was kind of funny. I was thinking of this as sort of like my TSN turning point of my professional career.
Yeah, I love it.
Before I started my PhD, I had an offer to go off to physiotherapy school. And I kind of sat there thinking like, oh, like which way do I go? I don't know. And, I think a big thing for me was, being in academia and teaching and doing research, like you can have so much impact, beyond you yourself as at least for myself, as what I could do as a singular practitioner. And I'm not saying that those who work in practice aren't making impacts, beyond their own practice. But for me and my skill set, teaching and sort of going public with addressing some of these questions was a big thing for me. So that's all to say is that I guess one of the ways that we try to make this fun is when I teach students how to do physical activity counseling, how to prescribe exercise. Like we come at it from the lens of, hey, yeah, at the end of the day, like we want people to move more, but if we want people to move, we have to do it in a way that taps into intrinsic motivations. Like you're doing it for yourself because it's something that you enjoy, right? So that's one thing. And then on the other side of things, I still here and there lead group exercise classes online, and we try to do fun things of getting people involved in the class and being silly and incorporating dance battles into what we do. Like that's just kind of my style. I'm a little bit of like wear the scrunchie and put your hair up and have a good time.
No, I love that. I think that's beautiful. And that's in my experience, it resonates too, that when physical activity is fun, people are more like, or just intrinsically enjoyable for whatever reason, whether it's from the music, whether it's the community, whether it's the physical feeling you get, like the endorphin rush, people are obviously going to be more likely to stick with it.
Yeah.
So I think this is, yeah. And I love your explanation of, being able to have a broader impact. I mean, people ask me sometimes, why do you have like a clinic where you see people with arthritis? And I don't at this time for the exact same reason that you said, like, if I can only see like, 8 patients a day as an occupational therapist versus being able to help larger groups and more people using like the various platforms I'm on. But I would love to delve a little bit more into rheumatoid arthritis, because there's so many, and so for those listening, if I didn't already say this, I have rheumatoid arthritis. If this is your first episode, I have been talking about this for like 130 something episodes. But yeah, so I'm 42 and I've had rheumatoid arthritis since 2003, so for 21 years. So, and just a quick background for just really, really quick, that I was very, very physically fit, very physically active. And I experienced what I didn't even know until 10 years later, because no one explained it to me, was severe rheumatoid cachexia before being diagnosed. So I lost like 20 pounds of muscle from like an 135 or 130-pound frame right before my diagnosis. My body was just so off and I felt awful. But anyway, and then so rheumatoid arthritis activity uncontrolled can directly lead to muscle wasting. That's one of the reasons strength training is important. What are some of the other reasons? That's just from my personal experience, like watching
Yeah.
my body dwindle. I was like, do I have muscle cancer? Like, what is happening? Because I didn't have an RA diagnosis yet. And I only had
Yeah.
one joint that hurt. That was the part that delayed my diagnosis. Anyway, I had an atypical
Hmm.
presentation initially, and that I did only
Hmm.
perceived. I wish I could go back in time and see, because I had such a high pain tolerance
Yeah.
from being an athlete, but I only perceived one joint that was hurting, my sprained finger.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
going down different routes. But why? So in general, that was my atypical experience. For the typical person with rheumatoid arthritis, why is strength training specifically important?
Yeah. Well, yeah, first off, Charlotte, thanks for sharing your experiences as well and for asking this question too, because it's an important question. Um, so why is strength training specifically important for people that are you already hit a really important point is to help decrease the risk or help slow the decline associated with rheumatoid cachexia. Another thing that's kind of similarly related but slightly different is sarcopenia, another kind of similar fancy term to say that we oftentimes see a decline in muscle mass, especially as we age, and that's not atypical. But where it does become atypical is when we see a more rapid decline, and it gets to the point where that decline in how much muscle you have and how well it works um, gets you to the point that you're not able to maintain independence, and that's the really scary part. So, the to put some numbers to it, people with RA actually have the are most are of the chronic conditions most likely to develop sarcopenia. And in fact, 16 times more likely to develop sarcopenia than those without RA. So that's, a scary
I
fact
didn't
to
know.
know. I know.
I knew we
Yeah.
were more likely. I didn't know it was that much more likely. Wow. Okay.
Hmm. Yeah.
Definitely noting
So,
that.
yeah, I know. I hate to bring the doom and gloom of like, oh, that's scary, but it just I mention it just to highlight the importance of strength training because one of the
Mm-hmm.
best things that we can do to combat sarcopenia is to do strength training, right?
Yes.
Or
Yes.
muscle strengthening activities. So
Mm-hmm.
there's the sarcopenia bit, there's the rheumatoid cachexia, there's making sure that you're able to maintain your independence, right? Like wanting to play with your kids or your grandkids or get on and off the toilet independently. Like these are all important things that we want to be able to do. And the other thing that I'll highlight, so these are some of the stuff that's relevant to rheumatoid arthritis, but it also extends to for those that don't have arthritis, is for the longest time, you might have, I don't know if you've heard, Cheryl, like if someone say, there's the physical activity guidelines where you're meant to get 150 minutes of moderate to
Yes.
vigorous physical activity week. So that's great. Like people talk about the 150 all the time, and a lot of the promotional stuff is for what's called like your aerobic activity. So that
Yeah.
would be sort of those continuous movements that get your heart rate up. You might, start to breathe heavier, get into a bit of a huff and puff, and what people typically associate with improving your what's called your cardiorespiratory fitness, but your ability to keep going for a long period of time without stopping. I'm not saying that that's not important, but it's not the stuff that keeps you strong. So the strength
No.
training stuff is the other side of the guidelines that we don't often talk about, and it's equally important and in disease prevention, like much of the aerobic activity is like walking, running, cycling, wheeling, etc. But strength training is uniquely important for helping to prevent things like sarcopenia, making sure that you stay strong, help to reduce the risk of falls. Like these are all really things that are quite unique to strength training.
Yeah, I think we should delve deeper if that's okay, because
Yeah.
I think this is something that is it, so crucial. And I think when we hear exercise or physical activity, I mean, I'm sure you've
Mm,
heard of all these different attempts to say instead of saying exercise, we should say physical activity. But we really are,
mm,
it's really apples
mm,
or oranges when we're talking about like getting your heart rate up for
yeah.
cardiovascular fitness, like you said, versus
Yeah.
muscle training. Obviously, if you're cycling or swimming, your heart rate is going to be up and you are using your muscles, but you're not like
Hmm.
your muscles are involved. It's not that they're it completely,
Hmm.
it's like apples and oranges that are like a Venn diagram that
Hmm.
overlap a little bit, strength training versus. So,
Totally.
how do you explain that to, I mean, you just explained it really well here, but I'm just like trying to figure out how to like put a giant exclamation point on this. It
Yeah.
like one of the things I remember in my training, maybe this is not, maybe this is like a half memory, so please tell me if I'm incorrect.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
about like slow twitch versus fast twitch, like different kinds of
Yeah.
fibers, like endurance
Yeah.
fibers versus, is that part of this or no?
Yeah, like I think we can get into some of that stuff about the
Okay.
different fiber typing, but I think like from a pragmatic, like just from like a useful perspective, you're getting into something that's really important, Cheryl. Is that like this Venn diagram concept? I think well, when you look at physical activity guidelines, we separate them as these two very different things. Like you're either doing aerobic activity or you're doing strength training. But the reality is there's a bit of a mix between the two, depending on what you do. So the way I like to see aerobic activity and strength training activity is sort of on a continuum. And I think like the continuum middle ground is where we have a lot of exciting questions and a lot to learn more about. Because if, I talked a bit about aerobic activity, like strength training is where you are moving against resistance. It could be using body weight, it could be using free weights, it could be using machines, bands, whatever that is. But the point is that you're moving against resistance. Now, there's kind of some in betweens here where, well, we haven't studied it quite as well. You could take something like hiking. Like, where do you classify hiking? Because,
Yeah.
like, many people will put it in this aerobic category, but you're also moving your body weight up. Like it's kind of like doing a bunch of lunges,
I was gonna say
right?
you're like loading, on your
Yeah,
quads. Certainly my quads feel it when I'm hiking. Yeah.
exactly.
Or doing
Yeah. So,
stairs. Stair workouts are like my
yep,
favorite or whatever.
exactly.
I'm a glutton for
You've got
punishment.
it. Yeah. So, I know we're going to get into myth busting
Yeah.
later, and we can talk about that later. But, you know, how we build muscle, like I think there's a lot more flexibility to how we build muscle than what we had traditionally perceived. And I think the more we get to understand about some of these like hybrid activities like hiking or certain sports, like maybe things like kayaking, boxing, like I think we can build strength and endurance through these activities all in one. But if we are looking at, kind of the traditional sense, it's oftentimes what people perceive as, what you do in the gym with
Yeah.
weights.
That makes sense. And some of it you can do with your own body weight too,
Oh
like in terms of
yeah.
like I like a good old fashioned wall sit, you know.
Oh yeah.
But and yeah, so what are some of the best resources? This is like a leading question because you have some
Mm.
amazing resources for people. What I hear a lot, because my specialty or my heart is really goes out to people either newly diagnosed or who just feel like they
Mhm.
have literally no understanding because
Yeah.
they've been left all alone to try to figure out how to live with this condition, which is sadly too many people. But people who want to get started, they're like, okay, everyone tells me I need to exercise. Bleh. Like, where do I go?
Yeah,
There's a
absolutely.
jillion websites out there.
There are, yeah, absolutely. And there are a lot of really great things. And I'm just gonna put a quick plug for Eileen again, because
Yeah.
like I said, I've learned so much from Eileen Davidson and her work. You can follow her on Chronic Eileen. And I think you mentioned that you'll link to that, but she's been a big source of inspiration and has helped us so much in developing a lot of the resources that we have. So there's certainly, linking in through the lived experience perspective. That is like step one, I think, and part of the process. But thank you also for, giving us the plug to talk a little bit about what our lab does as well. So we've put together what's called the iStart toolkit, which coming back to the acronyms, we love them all. It's short for improving strength training and tailoring in rheumatoid arthritis. So this toolkit we've been working on for, oh gosh, the past 6 years. And what it really is, it's a compilation of the evidence-based guidelines for how to do strength training with rheumatoid arthritis, especially as you're starting out. So what it sort of looks like is as a starting place, it's a suite of different resources, but one of the key resources is this complimentary practitioner and patient guide. So it could be that maybe you've got your rheumatologist or a physiotherapist or kinesiologist, and they want to learn more about how to work with a client or a patient with rheumatoid arthritis and how to get them started with strength training. So it's got some key resources on how to do that. But likewise, it's a two-way street, and these conversations, they really need to be co-developed in how we come to developing a strength training program, right? Because it's not the practitioner that has to do the program. It's it's you yourself as the individual. Like you have to do the hard work and the heavy lifting, pun intended. So, there's also a patient guide that helps to guide you through some of those key questions that would help your practitioner get to know you better and to best work with you to prescribe a program of strength training. Because I don't know about you, like, I have this experience all the time where you go to the doctor and you're like, I have all these important questions. I have all these things that I want to say. You get there and you panic and you tell them none of the things that you wanted to tell them, or you downplay all the things that you wanted to share, what have you.
It's
right?
the second one for me. I downplay it.
Right?
Yeah. It's hard.
So it is, right? And so that's kind of the purpose of this toolkit is, to give you a sense of the types of questions that you want to ask your practitioner, allows you the opportunity to maybe write down some of those ideas before you come in and have a conversation with them. And that can either be shared in advance with your practitioner so that they have, they can come better prepared to your session, or it's that accountability checklist that you're like, I'm going to share all the things I intended to share and I'm not going to downplay things. I'm going to make sure that I have this checklist essentially. So that's kind of the first thing of the iStart toolkit. And then there are a bunch of supporting resources for it. So in addition to having the conversation, we've got, a webinar to teach you about some of the basic principles of how to strength train with rheumatoid arthritis. So what do you do when you're in pain, when you're experiencing a flare, fatigue, all of the common symptoms that you experience with rheumatoid arthritis. And then beyond that, we've got sample exercise prescription forms. So, if you're having a good day or a bad day, it shows you how to maybe make the exercise more appropriate for a bad day or make it a little bit harder if you're feeling great. And then we've also got what I love, actually, one of my favorite things is we've got a series of exercise videos, and they feature both individuals living with and without rheumatoid arthritis. So we can see movements look a little bit different for everyone, and that's okay. That sometimes I think is something to be celebrated. So yeah, that does, gives us a little bit of an overview of what those resources are.
Well, and I'm seeing a common thread with, I just interviewed or published an episode with Dr. Liana Frankel, who's a rheumatologist, who's currently head of the Rheumatology Research Foundation, but she did a lot of research on shared decision making, which I'm sure you've heard about, which is like, the best practice in rheumatology, where you actually, it's like, for me as an occupational therapist, it was so weird to think that this was like, why do we have to even say this? Like, shouldn't this be what everyone's doing? But I guess we have to make it very explicit that you actually talk to your patient about what's important to them, ask them what is actually doable, meaningful, valuable in their life. And I think this is such a beautiful example of that, right? You have these conversations, this guideline, and it's like a PDF, just if you're trying to visualize what we're talking about. There's a PDF guideline for getting started. And then there's this really rich history, that my brain just autofilled that phrase, rich resource of videos. And the second thing that this reminded me of from the Dr. Liana episode is that it's about, there's a lot of videos online. You could see videos from patients doing exercises if you just Google on YouTube. But what's lacking in like the Wild West sometimes of Google and the internet is the curation by an expert voice, just to help you contextualize what you're seeing. So the fact that these are all curated videos by, you and your team and other academia people and other, that really helps you, gives you that trust in that resource. So
totally.
Little plug.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate you pointing that out, Cheryl. And just to give credit, like we have, while I get to be the, the talking head here, like we have a whole team that help to develop these resources. Folks that are coming in as practitioners, people with lived experience, as well as researchers. And like it takes a village to make these things and to do it right. And we're constantly iterating.
Absolutely. I mean, and I wanted to, you mentioned the myths about exercise in RA. I would love to hear, what are some of the biggest myths that you've seen with the patients that have come in, and or even just any conversations you've had, and this is your chance to bust the myths.
Totally. Yeah, I love myth busting. And I'll say too, with the caveat that evidence is always evolving. And so what our truth is today, like keep checking in because our truth in, 5, 10 years from now, hopefully and probably will be different, I think for the better. So, I want to start by saying with a little bit of an anecdote. So, Cheryl Cohn, who you might know, she's the founder and president of Arthritis
Yes.
Consumer Experts. Yes,
She's
everyone
been
knows
on the
Cheryl. She's
podcast.
a big deal, right?
Wow.
So,
It was the meeting of the
yeah, she
Cheryls.
does a
Yeah, it was
lot.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So, she's a former national team volleyball player. I don't know if she told you about that. Yeah.
Yeah, she did, but I
And,
forgot. Yeah.
yeah. So she was telling me about, when she was first diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, that her practitioner told her not to exercise. So you can imagine for a national level athlete being told not to exercise, like, whoa. And Cheryl, like she was like, nah, I'm doing it anyways. And I still say to this day it was one of the best things that she did for herself. So, the first myth is, and I think we've moved past this, but sometimes we do still have some old guard here and there, is that yes, movement is for everyone. It's just about finding the right ways to move. So, you know, I'll give you one example there. When you're experiencing a flare, like that's tough, right? And there's other factors there, like the fatigue, the pain that can make it really hard to move. But movement is still really important. Like motion is lotion. So we oftentimes, when you have sometimes I know it's multiple joints, it can be your whole body, but if you can, right, move the affected joint through available, tolerable range of motion and or focus on the areas that are less affected and decrease your intensity. So it could just mean, maybe it means, getting up to go for a little bit of a walk or a wheel. Just something is better than nothing, I think is like my first sort of myth, is that like we don't have to do everything at a high intensity and it doesn't have to be in these big chunks of 10 minutes or more. Like something is always better than nothing. That's the first thing.
I love that.
Yeah, yeah. The second one is that you already hit on it. You don't need fancy gym equipment. So we don't need a fancy gym membership. You don't need, your special clothes in a special place to do strength training per se. Like I said, as a starting place, like I mentioned, I live in Vancouver and it was really cute. My parents came to visit from Ontario. It's much flatter in Ontario. And my dad's like, I have this revelation. I know why people in Vancouver are so fit. You walk to the grocery store and you will encounter a hill.
So true. Yeah. Seattle's very
so
similar. I mean, we're 2 hours south of you. So yeah.
yes,
Same
right.
vibes.
So,
Yeah.
sometimes if the lifting weights isn't where you want to be, like maybe it starts by, walking in areas where, you've got sort of some gradual changes in elevation as a place to start. And then as you get stronger, then maybe it's then working towards, some of the stuff that's a little bit harder that, might incorporate, whether that's your body weight, whether it's, you could use exercise bands. When some people didn't have exercise bands, I said, great, use pantyhose, like, right? Or
Yeah.
household equipment, like anything you buy from Costco, that's heavy,
Yeah. Seriously. Yeah.
right? And the last thing that I'll say is a myth that I think is a really important one, and is that you don't have to lift heavy. So for the longest time, there was this perception that to improve your strength, you have to lift the heavy things. And we know that's not the case anymore. If you want to change how big your muscles are, as well as how much they can lift, you can even use light weights. So yeah. So
that is really out there. That is something I've definitely encountered, that idea that you have to really challenge the muscles in order to build muscle.
And so
To some
that is
degree,
the secret though, right? So it's like it's not about the weight that you lift quite as much until you get to like the sort of elite level. When you're looking at the elite bit there around like optimal strength, then yes, you do still have to lift heavy. Absolutely. But if the purpose is to improve your strength for general function, you want to get stronger, maybe you want to compete, in sport, what have you. But you're not at that 1 to 2% of final optimization. You can totally get by with lifting light weights. The caveat is that you should feel like your muscles are worked by the end. So we still have to have that intensity equivalent where, we are thinking like, okay, I couldn't keep going forever at the end of this set. So a
Yeah.
set is like, say, for example, you have 10 repetitions, that's one set, and then you take a break and then you do that again, that's another set. But at the end of the set, you think, okay, I might have, 3 repetitions left in the tank but you're not thinking, well, I could just keep doing this all day.
Yeah.
Because then
Yeah.
then that's a little bit trickier to get that same adaptation from those light weights. Like you still have to go to the point of like, oh my gosh, like I'm getting to the point where like I'm about to have to stop or just
Yeah.
before that.
Yeah. And I think, can I add one myth that will introduce a new topic of fatigue?
Yeah.
So I think this is something that just an aha moment that occurred to me after I started working with a personal trainer twice a week, just about
Mm-hmm.
1 year ago. And
Great.
my main thing was to help with functional daily activities and feel a little bit
Yeah.
stronger when I'm doing stuff like lifting and also just like theoretically, like, yeah, I'm in my 40s, I have rheumatoid arthritis, I should strength train. I've been putting this off long enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did not expect it outright to help with my fatigue. And my personal experience has been it is noticeable, like noticeably, I feel more
Mm-hmm.
energy but it wasn't right away. It took a couple
Yeah.
weeks, kind of. And I think that uh, the spoon theory, which many patients
Yeah.
resonate with, and I understand it's become part of a community. We're spoonies, we love each other. It's a
Yeah.
theory that
Yeah.
you use spoons as metaphors for energy units, and you go throughout, you only have so many to go through your day, and
Mm-hmm.
you take a shower, you use a spoon. The problem with the myth about that, right, is that you can only do things that use spoons and you can't do things that gain you
Add
a spoon.
spoon.
For me, it feels like when I strength train, particularly in addition to doing cardio, I actually gain energy. Have you seen that with
Mm.
any other patients?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
We hear that certainly, yeah, from a lot of stories that we hear from our clients and the patient partners that we work with is that movement adds to your day. Like it
Mhm.
gives you some of that fuel. And I think part of it, you know, there's there's the there's the physical aspect of movement that I think, adds to your spoons. But I think there's also for some people there's a social component to it, right? A lot of people will organize their movement or their physical activity with other people. And for
Mhm.
some of us, that really fills our cup. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's very multifactorial and yeah, as to why it can add, spoon or spoons to your day.
Yeah, and I was just surprised because I've always been good about cardio because I like that
Yeah.
little, endorphin high. Like I have an exercise bike and um, you know, or just walk and I used to run, but long story short,
Mhm.
I always thought that yeah, maybe I would feel, yeah, overall like I'm feeling more robust, but and maybe a
Mm.
little bit less fatigued after those workouts, but it was noticeable when with strength training. It's just really been a surprise, like a happy surprise for me.
Yes.
Um, and I just yeah encourage others and and obviously hopefully this has come up in many of the episodes just to like the fact that physical activity doesn't have to be scary. It can be fun
Yeah.
and it can and everyone diagnosed with RA often when they think about lifestyle wants to jump to like diet, but I
Mm.
my if I can only have to put my bet on one, I mean the evidence is a lot
Mhm.
stronger for just at least it's more uniform, I would say,
Yeah.
for physical activity than it is for nutrition. Not to say that any one individual might be better served by a nutrition intervention versus exercise intervention, but like, at the population level with like large groups of people, physical activity is like just over and over again is what
Yeah.
helps people with RA with pain and fatigue, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'll
Exercise
link
is medicine.
yeah, it is. Yeah, motion is lotion. And yeah, movement is medicine. I will put the 2022 American College of Rheumatology integrative health guidelines because they show in a chart, all the different lifestyle interventions and that consistent engagement in physical activity was the only one that was strongly recommended.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm saying this as an occupational therapist, and occupational therapy and physical therapy were not even as strongly recommended, you know? So it's
Right.
kind of like
Yeah, yeah.
my dedication is always to the truth, not to what actually serves me. My, I want to know what works for myself and
Absolutely.
for other patients. So, um, do your patients ever struggle with identifying joint pain versus muscle
Mm,
pain? Because I never did, because I think my theory was that because I was just an athlete, prior.
yeah.
Yeah. But because I think in your guidelines, I looked at the I start, and I think that was one thing I was like,
Yeah.
you say in there, it's okay for your muscles to hurt afterwards, but you don't want your joints to hurt afterwards, right? Is that ever difficult for
Yeah.
people to distinguish?
Yeah, I think so. Like, I think, people, even when we coach exercise, like some people do well with cueing that, has you think about like what you're feeling in your body, whereas other people will do better with like making, relationships to like your outside environment. So for example, like
Mhm.
if you're teaching a squat, you might say, okay, pretend like you've got a chair down there and you're going to try and touch your bum to the chair. Like that's kind of
Yeah.
like that external cue, whereas like an intrinsic would be like, okay, like, can you feel it in your butt? Can you feel it in, the backs of your legs and the fronts of your legs, right? Like all those, even just in how we coach and how people resonate with a cue, it's different from person to person. So likewise, being able to pick up on where they're feeling pain or where they're feeling their body being worked is different from person to person. So
Mhm.
part of the challenge with that and why we address that question in our guidelines is we have what's called DOMS, or delayed onset muscle soreness, which, if you haven't worked a muscle in a while and you put in work with it and you're like, maybe it's the next day or 2 days later and you're like, oh my gosh, everything hurts, this particular, so it can be scary, right? Because sometimes pain is both a good, like in some ways, pain is there for a reason because it tells us sometimes like when we've done too much. So
Yeah.
so that's why we try to make that distinction. If you've done an exercise that's new for you and you feel this kind of like soreness in your muscles the next day or maybe a couple of days later, sometimes that's okay, right? That's just the muscles adapting to this new stimulus. However, it is a little bit different if you've noticed that the pain is in the joint and it's also, progressing. And so that monitoring is really important about knowing what is your baseline level of pain, how does it feel, before, during, and after a workout and the follow up. So yeah,
Hmm.
it's tricky for a lot of people, and so much of that does come into some of the trial and error of just getting to know your body and your disease.
Yeah, and I think putting that expectation up from the front is so helpful, because I think if patients expect that it's going to be this linear process and I start feeling bad and I just start exercising and then I feel better and better and better and better in this like linear way, they're going to be discouraged if they don't
Yeah,
feel good. So if you say, "Oh yeah, no, there's going to be days," and sometimes I like to tell people, sometimes it's like a butterfly flapped its wings in Africa and you don't feel good that day, and that's not out of your
yeah,
control, you know?
yeah,
You're you might be listening to your body and you don't think you're pushing it too far, and then you wake up the next day and you're like,
yeah.
I'm in pain. What have I done? So that's,
Mhm.
and I think, I mean, I could tell just from your affect that like, that you're like a great, coach in that sense for the clients. And it's so nice to have someone there to validate you when you're going through those ups and downs and not have to go through it all on your own. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, so this is so great. I mean, I feel like we could just talk forever. Is there anything
Yeah.
else you wanted to say before I go to the rapid fire questions?
No, let's hit us with a rapid fire
Okay,
question.
perfect. Um, what are some of your best words of wisdom for newly diagnosed patients with rheumatoid arthritis?
Hmm. Yeah, I think first things first is to be kind to yourself. You led me into it perfectly, Cheryl. Like sometimes there are good days and there are bad days. So just, sometimes when it's a bad day, we have to adjust our expectations and that's okay. So yeah, not to get down on yourself. If you had set out these plans to do your workout and today's just not the day, that's okay. There will be other days and more appropriate days for that. So yeah, it's first thing, be kind to yourself. I'd say connect with community and become your own scientist. Like, and this comes from a lot of the clients that I've worked with over the years, is that I hear about this pattern of trial and error in that we can give these guidelines, but everyone is so unique. Like we're all little flowers, these little snowflakes. So to be open to trialing out what works for your body, and to listen to it. So yeah, be kind to yourself, connect with community, and become your own scientist.
Those are beautiful. And do you have a favorite arthritis gadget or tool in the toolbox that maybe you recommend for patients or your dad uses?
Yeah, I have. This is something that, yeah, I oftentimes will share with my clients, my family, and I use it myself all the time. But I mean, resistance bands, they're very affordable, but particularly like the loop resistance bands, because they like, you can get, like, they're just, you don't have to hold on to them, per se. Like you can kind of like, tension at the wrist, like if it's, if you have any challenge with that, with gripping. You can wrap it around your legs and do clamshells. Like hips are oftentimes a tricky joint with arthritis. There's just so many things that you can do with a loop resistance band, and you can buy one for probably $5. So yeah, that one's definitely my gadget of choice.
I love it. Do you have a favorite book or movie or show you consumed recently?
99. I love Brooklyn 99.
Oh my
I'm
gosh. Yeah.
sad. I'm sad that it's done and over with, but it's the only TV show that I've ever rewatched.
Oh wow. Wow, I love it. Yeah, he is so good. Why am I
Love Andy
forgetting his
Samberg.
name? What's the
Andy
guy's
Samberg.
Andy Sandberg. I was like,
Yeah.
literally my brain was like Adam Sandler. No, it's not Adam Sandler. Who is it? Yeah. I know what he looks like. I just my brain did not want to remember his
Yeah.
name. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
it. That's so great. Do you have a favorite mantra or inspirational saying?
Yeah. So my dad, he would always say, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. But then, I found this quote. It was actually on a calendar in a bathroom,
I love it. I love
which
it.
makes it sound way less cool, but I live by it. It's to control the controllables and enjoy the enjoyables. Like we have so much in our life that, things happen, and there's some things that we can have an impact on, and some we just have to enjoy it for what it is.
That is so beautiful. That's something I'm constantly working on. Just controlling the controllable, not trying to waste my
Yeah.
energy controlling the uncontrollable. So that's
Yeah.
perfect. Perfect timing for that reminder for me. So
Yeah.
thank you. And then what does it mean to you? This is again one of those very like broad questions to live a
Yeah.
good life and thrive with rheumatic disease.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to come at it from the kinesiologist perspective, like I do oftentimes refer to the 24-hour movement guidelines, where it's about not only getting your exercise, but your everyday active, making sure you're getting appropriate sleep, and decreasing the amount of time that we spend sedentary. But I think, to really tie that together and how we thrive, like community is so important. So there's like the behaviors that you do as an individual, but it's also the people around us that really make us whole.
That's like mic drop right there. You think we're going to talk about exercise, we're going to talk about community.
That's right. We love
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. Come for the exercise, stay for the community. That's
That's
the title.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Title of episode. No,
Yeah.
I'm always thinking, I'm grabbing like quotes from the episode or thinking in my head what the episode
I
title
love
will
that
be.
one.
No, that's so, so true. I mean, and again, we're all different. Like you said, it's really like that, self-evidence or becoming your own scientist. Some people, like I'm thinking, like my husband is more introverted. He enjoys,
Mhm.
some sedentary. He enjoys some alone time, physical activity,
Yeah.
taking a walk by himself, jogging
Yeah.
by himself, going on a hike by themselves. And I'm like, these are like, what's it like to want to be by yourself? Because I'm like such an extrovert. I'm like,
Agreed.
but we're all different, right?
That's
Like I
right.
had to remember myself the other day talking about my support group. I'm like, some people aren't like excited about the idea of a support group because they are
Yeah.
not like, I'm just gonna go process my feelings, which a bunch of people I have never met before. Like that is
Yeah.
scary to most people. To me, I'm like, new friends.
Yes. Yeah.
So
And yeah, and I think how you like engage with, that concept of community is different for each person. Like a community doesn't have to be a massive community. Like maybe it's not one person for you. And maybe it doesn't mean that you're exercising with people, but maybe if you came across something that you're like, I don't know to handle this, or I'm unsure about this, like maybe you're reaching out to your community, whether that's, other people with lived experience or your practitioner community to help guide you through and answer those questions. It's all to say is that, like, community has to be in the way that's right for you, but to remember that you're not alone.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And where can people find you online?
Yes. Well, probably the best place is to, for my contact information is on our lab website. That's m4a.kin.ubc.ca. But I do also have Twitter. That's Jasmin Ma, Jasmin with no E. My parents made it complicated for me.
That's okay.
Or my Instagram is Dr. Jasmin Ma.
Well, no, that's the new thing is everyone wants to like name their children names that are unique spelling, but no, I mean, I think it's a beautiful name. It's not that hard to remember. Yeah, thank you so much. No, you really helped distill this. Like, I feel like if I was a newbie to rheumatoid arthritis and to physical activity, I'd feel like you've helped make it really like doable. Like, okay, this is achievable. Other people do this. It's an evolution. It's trial and error, and it's good for me. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to get started using my iStart guide. So thank you so much. I hope
thank you, Cheryl. I really enjoyed this.
Oh my gosh. No, thank you. And I will put all the links to the things we talked about in the show notes. Oh, and I just wanted to define, because I can't remember if we defined it. The university, it's UBC, right? University of British Columbia.
That's correct.
Yeah, I always that's one of my pet peeves when I listen to a podcast and they don't always just explain what each acronym is. No, and I think I will say, but guilty, I often forget to just define RA as rheumatoid arthritis, because just in my head it's just like obvious because my world is arthritis, but arthritis is my life. So yeah, so that's what we meant earlier when we said that. But thank you so much. I will put links to all of these things in the show notes, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks again.
Thanks, Cheryl. Bye.
Bye.